They dropped the Deathworld girl a blunt training knife. She cracked their energy dome. The lecture hall smelled of recycled air, and 31 species being quietly afraid. Drenosha knew the smell. He had known it for 18 cycles, and he had learned to read it the way a good navigator reads weather, which fear was fresh, which was ambient, which meant the class was ready to receive what he was about to give them. He clicked the display to standby and let the silence run for 4 seconds before he stepped to the podium. His scales were gold before he reached it. The intake scan ran automatically, badges logged by the hall's receiver in order of seating row, gravity tolerances posted to his instructor feed in a column of green numbers. He swept the column the way you sweep a familiar street, looking for the one thing that breaks the pattern. The Cathali cadet in row 2, gravity tolerance of 2.7, got a private note of interest. The Vashrani pair near the back, clocking in at 3.1 combined, got 2 notes. He worked down the list. Sable Rain, row 4, gravity tolerance, 1 standard, origin, Earth, classification, restricted access. He moved to the next name. He had taught 14 cohorts. Softworld cadets were not rare. They were, in his experience, the most eager note-takers in any room, which he found both charming and slightly sad. The one badge was not data that required a second look. He had never, in 14 cohorts, needed to give a Softworld cadet more than half a second of his attention during intake scan. He did not notice the restricted access flag. It was small text beneath the primary readout. It was a footnote he had no reason to read. He activated the first hologram. She was in the 4th row when he began, a paper notebook open across her knees, actual physical paper, the kind with a soft cover that picks up the oils from your hands, the kind nobody uses anymore unless it is an aesthetic choice or they grew up somewhere without reliable data networks. The cover had a faded logo from what his translation feed rendered as a nature reserve. She had a pen. She uncapped it. The cadet beside her, a young Cathali whose scales had gone the pale silver of genuine, stressed the moment she walked into the hall. Already had 3 datapad tabs open and a stylus gripped in 2 hands. Sable's notebook had 1 page of notes from the pre-reading. There was a small pressed flower stuck to the inside cover. He did not look at it closely enough to see what kind. The Velthari razorback rendered at full scale 3 meters of metallic quills, toxin glands along the dorsal ridge, a jaw structure rated to fold standard containment alloy on the 3rd compression cycle. Drenosha had used this hologram for 9 consecutive cohorts. He knew exactly what it did to a room. It did it again. The Cathali cadet beside Sable made a sound that was not quite a word in any language the hall's translation platform could process. The platform rolled back 6 centimeters on its base. A Vashrani cadet in the back row stood halfway up from her bench and sat back down. 11 distinct visible reactions registered across the room in the first 3 seconds of display, ranging from gripped desk to controlled breathing exercise to one cadet who simply put both hands over her crest. Sable uncapped her pen and began writing. Her pen moved at the same speed it had moved during roll call. Drenosha narrated the toxin mechanism with the relish of someone who has given the same speech many times and still believes in it. Paralysis within 90 seconds of first contact, full sensory function retained throughout. Not a mercy. The razorback did not need to wait for its prey to stop functioning, it needed only for prey to stop moving. He had timed this pause perfectly across 14 cohorts. He let it land. He swept the room once. The cadet in row 4 was writing. He read the expression as slow comprehension, the Softworld student absorbing something she had no prior frame for, working through it carefully. He did not look at what she was writing. He advanced the hologram to the dorsal ejection sequence and kept going. Her margin note, which he would not read for another 3 hours, said, Quill deployment, compare Hystrix dorsata, North American porcupine, key mechanical difference, active musculature versus passive spine deployment. Note toxin, note patience. She had underlined, note toxin. She had underlined, note patience twice. Stay with me. What happens next is not what anyone in that hall expected, including the man running it. The snapback arrived. in the form of a question that had been waiting since the scan. 40 minutes into the lecture, a cadet near the center of the room raised a hand, Theresi species, four-eyed, the kind of student who asks the clarifying question everyone else was afraid to raise. His name was in Drenosha's register as Valitorn. He had good instincts. Instructor, Valitorn said, the Razorback has never been documented outside borderline classification survey zones. What do the numbers look like in genuine Category 7 environments? Drenosha's scales shifted to amber, thinking gold, while he pulled the statistics from memory. Category 7 encounter fatality rates by documented field team. He had these cold. The Razorback alone accounted for a significant share of losses in borderline zones because it was the creature field teams consistently failed to respect, it being the one that most resembled something they had seen before. He made this point with some precision. In the fourth row, Sable wrote, familiarity bias, more dangerous than unfamiliarity. They die because they think they know what it is. She did not raise her hand. Drenosha concluded the Razorback section and clicked the display forward. The Sorathi Shade Runner loaded. He had been teaching this one for 9 cycles, and it still made his scales go dark amber at the edges. Pack Hunter, tool user, not in the incidental sense, in the deliberate architectural sense. It had been documented bracing a door open with a pried panel to prevent an escape route from closing. Intelligence of a kind that, if you encountered it in the dark, you would not immediately classify as animal. Its first reliable documentation came from a research station, the incident report written by the 6 surviving members of a team of 50. He had read the original report. He had read the section on how the lights went out first. Comms second. He let the hall understand this for a moment before he continued. The room was entirely silent. The Cathali cadet beside Sable had stopped writing. He was simply sitting, scales faded to a pale that meant genuine fear, stylus resting on the pad without touching it. The Theresi cadet in the center had all 4 eyes forward. The translation platform had rolled slightly further back, which Drenosha had always suspected was not an accident. Sable's pen paused, not stopped, paused, the nib resting above the page while her eyes stayed on the hologram display. Then she wrote, isolation strategy, communication shutdown before engagement. Compare wolf, pack separation of prey from herd before the run. Shade Runner does it faster and quieter. Same principle, see pack coordination literature. She underlined, same principle. She kept writing. Drenosha's scales flickered to amber. He had expected the pause to mean she was finally absorbing the weight of the material. The expression on her face when her pen stopped was not horror or awe. It was the expression of a person cross-referencing. He did not know what she was cross-referencing it with. He filed this observation nowhere because it had no category in his experience. He moved on to the station incident details, the 44 researchers, the timeline, the weeks of apparently normal behavior preceding the coordinated assault, the systematic way the power grid had been addressed before any member of the team realized an assault was underway. He was aware, delivering this, that it was the strongest material in the lecture. He could feel the room. He did not look at her again for the next 8 minutes. When he did, she was turning to a fresh page. The domestication question came from a Vishrani cadet in the back, the one who had half stood during the Razorback display. Her name was Irisha Valon. She waited for a pause in the lecture and raised her secondary arm. Is there any documented case of successful domestication of Category 6 or above fauna? Drenosha's scales pulsed dark gold. He loved this question. He loved it specifically because the answer was the single best argument for why instinct alone was not sufficient, why even prolonged positive behavioral modification produced outcomes that were ultimately catastrophic on a reliable enough timeline to constitute data. He had told the Drullen cat story 14 times. It still landed. The Drullen cat had been a long-term domestication project, a research team's attempt to demonstrate that Category 6 fauna, given sufficient time and controlled positive reinforcement, could be safely integrated into a closed habitat. They had 6 months of immaculate data. The subject ate on schedule, responded to the team, showed no aggression markers. The research lead had been 3 weeks from publishing. And then, on a night with no recorded provocation, the subject had breached a reinforced viewport rated for hard vacuum. Not by force, by patience, repeated, incremental pressure on one point over a period of months until the tolerance gave. The breach had taken 43 seconds of vacuum exposure and done nothing to the animal that any instrument could measure. It had then used the station's ventilation system for 3 months. By the time the team understood what they were dealing with, there were 17. Station evacuation, full sterilization protocol. The research lead's data was published with a different conclusion than the one she had been planning to write. Drenosha spread all 4 arms wide. He could feel the room. Sable's pen had stopped. He noted it at the edge of his awareness. She was the only one not reacting. Not horror, not relief, not fascination. She was looking at the hologram display with her pen lifted, and the expression on her face was one he had not catalogued before in a student: recognition. The specific kind that means I know this already rather than I am learning this now. He swept the room. Is this clear? Does everyone understand what the Drullen Cat record establishes? Sable nodded. It was not the nod of a student confirming understanding. It was the nod of someone being told something they had already worked out. The exact shape of it, the slight delay, the absence of any shift in her expression was a thing he noticed and filed nowhere again because it had no category. In the margin of her notebook, in small letters below the main entry on the domestication section, she had written, "Mr. Barnacle waited 11 months before he worked out the refrigerator. We put a child lock on the handle. Nobody filed a quarantine protocol." She turned the page. Valitorn's hand went up again 40 minutes later, near the end of the theoretical section. Instructor, hypothetically, could a Deathworld species develop sentience, given enough time? The hall shifted. It was a question cadets always thought about and rarely asked directly because it felt like it was touching something it shouldn't. Drenosha almost smiled. His scales warmed to the brightest gold of the session. He had the answer cold. He had the citations. He had the evolutionary framework and the logical chain that led from first principles to the conclusion that no, not hypothetically, not theoretically, not under any measured environmental model, it was not possible. Sentience required cognitive surplus. Surplus required evolutionary breathing room. Breathing room did not exist on a Deathworld. The pressure that produced a perfect predator was the same pressure that foreclosed higher cognition. The two simply could not coexist. It was not a value judgment. It was how selection pressure worked. He explained this with the full weight of 18 cycles behind him. The hall received it the way it always did. Relief from the soft-world cadets, fascination from the high-gravity ones, a general settling of posture that meant the framework had been accepted and integrated. In the 4th row, Sable Rain's expression did not change. She had a look of polite neutrality. That was all. Nothing shifted, not her posture, not the angle of her pen, not the pace of her breathing. If Drenosha had been closer, if he had been reading faces instead of scales, he would have recognized it. The specific careful blankness of someone listening to an argument they know is wrong and choosing, for reasons of their own, not to say so. He was not closer. He was reading the room by its scales and its posture and its sounds, and all of those told him the class had landed well. He assigned the simulation examination slots for the following morning. He dismissed the class. He did not look at Sable Rain again as the hall cleared. She filed out with everyone else, notebook under her arm, pressed flowers still stuck to the inside cover. She did not look back. The smell of 31 species being afraid faded slowly from the recycled air and was replaced, by degrees, with nothing at all. The simulation bay smelled different from the lecture hall. The lecture hall had 31 species worth of ambient chemical signals, stress hormones, respiratory byproducts, the faint mineral edge of iron-filtered air. The simulation bay smelled of none of that. It smelled of nothing carefully, the way a room smells when it has been cleaned of every biological trace before an examination. Drenosha had always found this smell clarifying. It meant the previous cohort's data had been scrubbed. It meant whatever happened next would be clean. He watched from the observation room as Cohort 7's first team filed in. Team 4, 2 Vashrani cadets, the Theresi with good instincts, and Sable Rain. The scenario loaded on the bay's adaptive projection, Category 6 containment breach, standard research outpost layout, one specimen active in the lower corridor. Drenosha had set the difficulty 2 rungs above the cohort average. He had done this for every intake cohort since his 3rd year of teaching. It separated the cadets who had read the material from the ones who could use it. The team lead was the senior Vashrani Irishavalon, the one who had half stood during the Razorback display and then controlled herself. Good instincts, possibly good under pressure. She assigned roles in under 30 seconds, which Drenosha noted. Theresi on containment rigging, Junior Vashrani on the coolant valve, Sable on communications. Softworld stock, Irishavalon said, not unkindly, you hang back and relay. Sable took the comm unit without comment. She moved to the designated anchor point near the back wall and put on the headset. Her notebook was not with her. She had left it on the bench outside the bay. Drenosha noticed this. He had assumed the notebook came everywhere. The breach alarm fired. The simulation loaded full. The plan was sound. Drenosha watched the feed and ran it against his own instincts. Funnel the specimen into the lower corridor, drop the coolant to reduce its core temperature, hold it in the containment field until the field generator locked. Irishavalon had absorbed the lecture material well. Her team moved with the clipped efficiency of cadets who had rehearsed this on paper and were now executing it for the first time in a body. The coolant dropped. The field generator went dark. Drenosha leaned forward. The coolant temperature had hit the generator's power cells, a failure mode he had not included in the scenario parameters because it was not in the scenario parameters. It was a secondary equipment fault that the bay's adaptive system had introduced. He had not set it to introduce secondary faults. He checked the feed log. The log said he had. He had not done that. He filed this away as something to investigate after the session and watched the scenario continue. 2 simulated casualties in under 90 seconds. The specimen, a fully adaptive projection, responsive to every cadet decision in real time, had pivoted from the failed coolant zone and moved toward the remaining team members. Irishavalon ran the perimeter route, which was correct protocol. The Theresi went for the secondary coolant valve, which was also correct. The junior Vashrani froze, which happened, and was also data. Sable picked up the stun rifle. It was resting against the wall beside the communications station, where Drenosha had placed it as a contingency option. It was a Cathali-designed instrument, built for 4-fingered hands with a wider grip span than human anatomy. He watched her pick it up. He watched her look at it once, not with the expression of someone confronting a weapon, with the expression of someone evaluating a tool for a job they know how to do, and adjust her grip. Under 2 seconds for the adjustment. He did not understand this. He watched it happen, and he did not understand it. She fired. 4 shots, each placed with a precision that Drenosha, in 18 cycles of field certification examination, had seen twice before, once from a weapons specialist and once from an examiner demonstrating technique. Maximum neural disruption placement, no wasted movement, no secondary shot to compensate for a first that went wide. Each one went exactly where it needed to go. The specimen, the adaptive projection, reacting in real time to every input, registered all 4 hits and dropped. Elapsed time from the moment she lifted the rifle to the moment the specimen was down, 11 seconds. She set the rifle on the floor, she keyed her comm. Her voice, when it came through the observation room speakers, was level. 2 team members down, simulated casualties, requesting medical relay, specimen contained. Drenosha's scales went pale. The color drained from his plates, the way it drains from a Cathali who has stepped too close to something large and fast and had the evolutionary part of their brain register it before the cognitive part caught up. He was aware this was happening. He was not able to stop it. His 4 arms extended. All of them simultaneously. The involuntary prey detection reflex he had trained out of himself in his first year of teaching, the response he had not fired in 6 years, came up from somewhere below the level of conscious control and fired fully, hands spread, arms locked out, and held for 3 seconds before he got it back. Nobody saw it, he was alone. He turned to his instructor console. He pulled Sable Rain's badge file. He found the restricted access flag immediately. It was still small text, still beneath the primary readout, still the footnote he had never had reason to read. He read it. The footnote was 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph described the diplomatic exception category, a classification status applied to worlds undergoing active council review where public designation as a death world would trigger specific economic and transit restrictions before the council was prepared to manage them. Standard suppression protocol. He had known this category existed in the abstract. He had never encountered it applied to a specific world. The second paragraph named the world. He read Earth's actual gravity range. He read it twice. The measurement systems that produced the official one figure were calibrated to sea level on the planet's most hospitable coastal zones under temperate conditions. Alternate measurement systems, calibrated to biological load rather than physical pressure, produced a range of 1.7 to 2.1. He stared at this number. He thought about the Razorback. He thought about the lecture he had just finished delivering. He sat down. He sat down in the observation room chair and looked at the simulation feed, where Sable Rain was helping the recovered Ireshavalon to a seated position against the corridor wall, and checking the junior Vashrani's status with the same level expression she had worn for the entire 90-minute lecture. He called her badge ID to his comm. "Cadet Rain, my office, when the simulation clears." She arrived 11 minutes later. The notebook was back under her arm. The pressed flower was still on the inside cover. She sat in the chair across from his desk with the specific quality of stillness Drenosha had begun, in the past hour, to completely reinterpret. He had thought it was soft-willed composure, the calm of someone who had never been near anything that could genuinely kill them, so had no calibrated threat response to fire. He had been wrong about this in a way that was now reorganizing his understanding of the last 2 weeks. "Your home gravity range," he said. "Walk me through what that number actually means." She considered this, not with the hesitation of someone working out what to say, with the brief pause of someone deciding where to begin. "The official figure is a coastal average," she said. "Most of the planet doesn't match it. Atmospheric oxygen content runs higher than the standard reference, which affects physical output. Biodiversity index is in the top 4% of surveyed worlds. Fauna density in rural zones runs well above Class 5 equivalency." "How far above?" "It depends on the region. In areas where my family has land, roughly Class 6, by the GFCI's own metric. The fauna isn't classified that way because the classification system doesn't account for the suppression flag, but the animals are the same animals." Drenosha's scales cycled through amber and back to grey. He did not have a word for the grey. He did not think his species had a word for the grey, because it was not a color Kethali experienced often. It was the color of someone watching their model of the world develop a crack they could not immediately measure. "Bears," he said. He had been reading while he waited for her. The file had more in it than the 2 paragraphs of footnote. "Among others, the file says you have documented contact. Twice, both times on my family's property, nothing happened." He waited. "You make yourself appear large," she said. "Back away slowly. Don't run. Running engages the chase response. Make noise on the way in so they know you're there. The protocols aren't complicated. Earth fauna is not unreasonable if you understand its logic." She paused. "Most of it." "Most of it." "Mosquitoes," she said. "There's no protocol that meaningfully helps with mosquitoes." Drenosha put 2 of his hands over his face. He kept the other 2 flat on the desk because they had been doing something involuntary for the past 30 seconds that he did not want to examine. After a moment he said, from behind his hands, "I delivered a lecture yesterday on Deathworld fauna to 31 cadets. Yes, one of whom was from a world that measures in the range of 1.7 to 2.1 on every metric I use to determine whether a world qualifies as a death world. The suppression flag is genuinely confusing, she said. I understand why it wasn't flagged. I argued that Deathworld species are evolutionarily incapable of developing higher cognition. Your sources are good, she said. The framework is sound. It just has a gap in the sample data. He took his hands away from his face. His scales were the pale, flat grey of genuine shock. He looked at her. She was sitting with the same quality of stillness she had maintained through the lecture, through the simulation, through 11 minutes of waiting for this conversation. She was not performing composure. She was not suppressing a reaction. She simply did not have a register for this level of thing being dramatic. He thought about the Drullen cat. He thought about 6 months of perfect behavior followed by a reinforced viewport. He thought about the way his own anecdote had just retroactively described something he was now sitting across from. You sat through the entire lecture, he said. You're an excellent instructor, she said. Your containment protocols are genuinely sound. The Sorathi Shade Runner section is the best material in the module. Drenosha was quiet for a long time. You didn't correct me, he said, during the sentience argument. No, she agreed. Why not? She considered this the same way she had considered the opening question, the brief pause of someone deciding where to begin, not what to say. Because you were right about everything you had data for, she said, the argument is solid for every world in the standard registry. Earth just isn't in the standard registry the same way. It seemed more useful to let the lecture finish than to flag a footnote in front of 30 other cadets. Drenosha sat with this. Outside his office window, the hallway was emptying, Cohort 7 dispersing toward the commissary, the last examination teams clearing the simulation bay. He could see the Theresi, Veli Torn, walking with the senior Vashrani. He could see further down the hall 2 other cadets he knew by badge number and home gravity and species, but not, he was beginning to understand, by anything more than that. He looked at Sable's notebook on the edge of his desk. He had not asked her to put it down. She had set it there when she sat, automatically, the same way someone sets down a bag. The cover was facing him. The Nature Reserve logo was faded in a way that suggested the notebook had been carried for a long time before any of its pages were used. He thought about the margin notes he had not read. I'm going to need to think about how to document your simulation performance, he said. The result is legitimate. The attribution of origin is, he stopped, complicated. I understand, she said. For now, if anyone asks, rural upbringing, good reflexes, prior familiarity with working tools, that's accurate as far as it goes. That's accurate as far as it goes, she agreed. She was not agreeing because she was told to. She was agreeing because it was true. He looked at her, she looked at him. She had dark eyes that were entirely calm, the specific calm of someone who has grown up near things that will test whether you are calm and has therefore become, by necessity, genuinely calm rather than the performance of it. He thought, I have 14 cohorts of data on Softworld cadets. He thought, I have no data on this. You're going to be the death of me, he said, before he could stop himself. I certainly hope not, she said. You're an excellent instructor. The Shade Runner module alone is worth the entire registration fee. She picked up her notebook and stood. She tucked it under her arm. She was almost at the door when he thought to ask. Why conservation, he said. Of all the fields, why this one? She paused at the door, considered. Someone needs to make sure the fauna is protected and managed by people who actually understand it, she said. I grew up near things like this. I understand how they work. They're not unreasonable. They just have their own logic. She looked back at him, and her expression had the same quality it had in the lecture when he asked if everyone understood. Not performance, not warmth turned on and aimed, just simple directness from someone who means exactly what she says. It seemed like a reasonable fit. She left, the door shut behind her with a sound that was not dramatic at all. Drenosha did not move for a while. He was looking at the edge of his desk where the notebook had been. It was still there. She had left it. He reached it at the 4-minute and 40-second mark, as predicted. He read the subsection on behavioral modification resistance. He read the subsection on spatial memory in enclosed environments. He read the part about object manipulation, the documented cases, the tested complexity levels, the peer-reviewed conclusion that the domestic variant of Earth's primary felid had developed, through cohabitation pressure, a problem-solving capacity that exceeded what its evolutionary niche would strictly require. He put the database down. He thought about Mr. Barnacle and the refrigerator. He thought about Mr. Barnacle and the keys to the dry goods store. He thought about the child lock on the handle. He sat in his office for a while with his 4 arms folded in the specific arrangement his species uses when it has arrived somewhere unexpected and needs to stay there long enough to understand it. His scales were the grey amber of a Kethali who is not in danger, but whose brain has filed a preliminary report that the map and the territory have diverged, and someone will need to reconcile them. He was going to need to rewrite more than the sentience module. The Institute's classification review protocol required a formal notification anytime an enrolled cadet's background data was found to be incomplete in a way that affected their curriculum placement. Drenosha had filed one of these in his 3rd cohort, a Vashrani cadet whose home gravity data had been entered at the wrong unit of measurement, which had affected her equipment assignments. He had filed the form, the data was corrected, the cadet had been moved to the correct equipment track. 40 minutes of administrative work. He opened the form now. It was the same form, the fields were the same. He looked at them for a moment. Cadet name, Sable Rain. Discrepancy type, classification suppression, diplomatic exception category. Affected curriculum elements. He stopped. He thought about what to put in that field. He thought about it with the specific precision of someone who understands that what he writes in this field will determine what happens next, and what happens next will determine whether Sable Rain finishes her degree at the Galactic Fauna Conservation Institute, or is quietly redirected to a track the Council considers more appropriate for a cadet from a world with a footnote. He thought about 11 seconds. He thought about he's right that they're dangerous, he just doesn't know why he's right. He thought about her answer when he asked why conservation. Someone needs to make sure the fauna is properly protected and managed by people who actually understand it. She had not said this to impress him. She had said it because it was her reasoning, stated plainly, the way she stated everything. He typed affected curriculum elements. None. Cadet's background data, when correctly interpreted, indicates full qualification for enrolled track. Recommend classification review at the institute level to address the suppression footnote protocol. Current intake system has no mechanism to flag diplomatic exception categories for curriculum assessment. This is a gap in the system, not in the cadet. He read this back. He sent it. The notification generated automatically from the filed form. A summary document, routed to the Institute's Academic Oversight Board, flagged for review at the next quarterly session. It was not dramatic. It was a PDF, 4 pages, the kind of document that arrives in an inbox and sits in a folder until someone has time to open it, and then gets passed to a committee and eventually results in a policy change that nobody quite remembers the origin of. Drenosha had written the section on the suppression footnote gap himself in plain language with 3 supporting citations. He had written it the way Sable took notes, specific, useful, unhurried. At the bottom of the notification document, in the field for Cadet Assessment Summary, he had written, Cadet Rain demonstrates exceptional competence in applied fauna management. Her performance in the practical examination exceeded the cohort's standard by a margin for which the current assessment rubric does not have a category. Her understanding of Deathworld fauna, its behavior, its logic, the appropriate protocols for human coexistence with it, is not theoretical. It is lived experience, correctly interpreted and applied. The Institute has never enrolled a cadet from a diplomatically suppressed Deathworld classification. It should have a protocol for this. In the absence of one, my assessment is, she belongs here, possibly more than anyone I have taught. He paused over the last sentence. He left it. He thought no, he corrected himself. That sentence was the honest one, but it was also in a document that was going to a board, slightly more than he needed to say. He deleted possibly more than anyone I have taught and replaced it with, her enrollment is not an anomaly the system failed to catch. It is an outcome the system should have been designed to produce. He read this back. He sent the document. He sat for a moment. The office was quiet. The ceiling had 19 panels, which he had counted. Outside the window, the last of Cohort 7 had cleared the corridor. The commissary lights were the only things still lit in that direction. He could see, at the edge of the frame, the aquatic specimen tank's blue-green glow reflecting off the corridor wall. He looked at the notebook. He had been meaning to return it since she left. He would return it in the morning. He would put it on his desk, where she could collect it at the start of the session, and she would pick it up without comment and tuck it under her arm, and that would be that. He opened it one more time, not to the lecture notes. He turned to the back, where she had left several pages blank, and found that they were not entirely blank. The last used page had a single entry, written in a different pen, in slightly larger letters than the margin notes. It was not a lecture note. It was the kind of thing someone writes for themselves, not for a class. Earth Fauna Notes, personal. Reminder for relocation contexts. The things here are not the things at home. Adjust protocols accordingly. Do not assume the threat profile. Do not assume the safety profile. Start from the animal in front of you, not the one you know. He read it twice. Then, below this, in smaller letters. The things at home are not the things here either. Remember that too. Drenosha closed the notebook. He set it precisely in the center of his desk. He folded all four of his hands in front of him and looked at the cover, the faded Nature Reserve logo, the letters S-Rain, field notes, worn at the edges, the way things get worn when they go everywhere with a person. He thought about what the Institute was going to do with a formal notification that it had enrolled a cadet from a diplomatically suppressed Deathworld classification, and that the cadet was, by every measure he could document, exactly where she should be. He thought the Institute was going to have to build a protocol. He thought the protocol was going to be called something like Special Classification, Suppressed Origin Cadets, and it was going to live in the same section of the registry where the diplomatic footnote lived, and it was going to say, in the formal language of academic policy, cadets from worlds in this category shall be assessed on documented competence rather than origin classification. He thought this was the correct outcome. He thought Sable Rain was going to be the only person in the building who would receive this news without it being news. She was at her desk in the residence when the notification came through. It was a standard academic assessment summary, the kind that posted to a cadet's record after a practical examination, a paragraph of instructor notes and a placement confirmation. She had been expecting it. She opened it. She read the assessment summary. She read the part that said her understanding of Deathworld fauna is not theoretical. It is lived experience, correctly interpreted and applied. She read the part that said her enrollment is not an anomaly the system failed to catch. It is an outcome the system should have been designed to produce. She set the data pad down on her desk. She looked at it for a moment. She picked it up and read the last line again. Then she set it down, picked up her field notebook. She had collected it from the session bench before dinner, assumed she'd left it somewhere in the afternoon shuffle, and opened it to a fresh page. She wrote the date, the session number, the practical examination summary in her own shorthand, breach scenario, coolant fault, 11 seconds. She paused. Then, in the margin, in the small letters she used for the observations she made for herself rather than for any record, Instructor Drenosha. Good teacher, knows the material cold, writes honest reports, recommended. She closed the notebook. She checked the time. The commissary closed in 20 minutes. She had not had the grain option at dinner, and she had been thinking about it. She put the notebook on the corner of her desk. She would take it to tomorrow's session pulled on her jacket, and headed out. The corridor was quiet at this hour. The aquatic tank glowed at the far end, the Kelari drifter still making its specific, patient circuit. She stopped for a moment and watched it through the glass. It did not stop. It continued its round with the focus of something that had decided where it was going and saw no reason to reconsider. She appreciated this about it, the same way she had appreciated it every day since the second week of orientation. She kept walking. In his office, Drenosha was drafting a supplementary note to attach to the quarterly notification. He was going to recommend the Institute form a working group on origin-suppressed cadets. He was going to recommend the working group include, as a consultant, someone with direct experience of a suppressed classification world. He was going to recommend Sable Rain. He was also, because he was an honest person and an honest administrator, going to attach a revised version of the Week 4 lecture notes, specifically the section on sentience and evolutionary pressure, with a note that said the current framing relied on a sample set with a known gap. He was going to have to footnote his own lecture with a cadet who was currently getting a grain option from the commissary. His scales, which had been cycling through grey and amber and the color he had no name for all evening, settled into something that, after a moment, he recognized as the amber of actual interest, not the gold of performed confidence, the amber of someone who has encountered something they don't yet understand and intends to. He looked at the notebook on his desk. He thought about the Nature Reserve logo. He thought about the pressed flower. He thought about 18 cycles of field experience and 14 cohorts and the footnote he had never had reason to read. He wrote one more line in the supplementary note. The classification system has a gap. The gap has a name. It is currently enrolled in cohort 7 and it is doing well. He stopped. He deleted this. It was not the right tone for a formal document. He typed instead, this intake cycle produced one recommendation the Institute's current framework did not anticipate and cannot fully account for. The recommendation is simple: build the framework. He sent it. He closed the document. He looked at the notebook. He picked it up one last time and read the back page again. Start from the animal in front of you, not the one you know. And then he set it on the shelf by his door so she would see it when she came in for tomorrow's session. He turned off the office light. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the notebook on the shelf, the Nature Reserve logo facing out, worn at the edges, the letters S Rain, field notes catching the corridor light. He had been teaching for 18 cycles. He had 14 cohorts of data. He had never, in any of those cohorts, needed to add a footnote to the system itself. He turned off the light. The galaxy had a name for planets like hers. Earth had a name for places like this, Tuesday.